Thomas Wells had never considered himself a philosopher. At 35, he was a literature professor at a small liberal arts college, content with his modest apartment and quiet life. That changed on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when he stumbled upon an old, leather-bound copy of Arthur Schopenhauer's essays in a dusty corner of an antique bookshop. "Interesting find," remarked the elderly shopkeeper, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose. Not many people reach for Schopenhauer these days. Thomas hadn't intended to buy the book, but something about the shopkeeper's knowing smile compelled him. That evening, as rain tapped against his windows, he began reading. The pessimistic German philosopher's words seemed to leap from the page, especially his controversial writings about women. "Good Lord," Thomas muttered, nearly spilling his tea as he read passages that felt shockingly dated and misogynistic to modern sensibilities. Yet, beneath the obvious bias, he sensed something more complex, a worldview shaped by disappointment and a search for meaning in a seemingly indifferent universe. Days turned into weeks as Thomas found himself increasingly absorbed in Schopenhauer's world. His colleagues noticed the change during faculty meetings, his mind elsewhere, fingers drumming absently on the table. "Earth to Thomas," said Elaine, the department chair, after everyone else had filed out of the conference room. "You've, been somewhere else lately? Everything all right?" "Just got caught up in some research," he said, gathering his papers. "Must be fascinating research to make you forget about the curriculum review deadline." Thomas felt his face flush. "Sorry about that. I'll have it to you tomorrow." That night, instead of working on his curriculum review, Thomas found himself taking notes on Schopenhauer's essay, On Women. The philosopher's words were harsh, claiming women were intellectually short-sighted, lacking in reason, and existing primarily for the continuation of the species. Thomas knew these views were problematic, products of 19th century misogyny, yet he couldn't help wondering what personal experiences had shaped such bitter perspectives. "You've been reading what?" Rebecca's voice carried across the faculty lounge, drawing glances from other professors. His colleague in the gender studies department stared at him, coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. "It's research," Thomas explained hastily. "I'm looking at how philosophical biases affect literary criticism throughout history." Rebecca set her mug down carefully. "And you chose Schopenhauer as your case study? The man who wrote that women are mentally myopic and only good for child-rearing?" "I'm not endorsing his views," Thomas countered, feeling defensive. "But there's more to his philosophy than just the misogyny. His work on human suffering and the will has merit." "Just be careful," Rebecca said, gathering her books. "Some students might not appreciate the nuance between studying toxic ideas and promoting them." Her words followed Thomas throughout the day, making him question his growing fascination. That night, Thomas dreamed he was sitting across from Schopenhauer himself in a dimly lit German coffee house. The philosopher's penetrating gaze seemed to look right through him. "You think me a misogynist," dreamed Schopenhauer said, his German accent thick but understandable. "You judge me by the standards of your time, not mine." "Some truths transcend time," Thomas found himself saying. "And what of your own disappointments with women? Have they not colored your perspective as well?" Thomas awoke with a start, sweat beading on his forehead. His ex-wife's face lingered in his mind. Her parting words 3 years ago still stung. "You live in your books, Thomas, not in the real world." Today we're discussing how philosophers influenced literature in the 19th century, Thomas began, looking out at his sophomore literature and society class. Specifically, how Schopenhauer's pessimism influenced writers like Thomas Hardy and others. A hand shot up immediately. It belonged to Maya Richards, one of his brightest students. "Professor Wells, isn't Schopenhauer known for his deeply sexist views on women? Shouldn't we address that context?" Thomas nodded, feeling unexpectedly defensive. "Yes, and we will address those problematic aspects. But there's more to his philosophy than just—" "I read that he literally compared women to animals," interrupted another student scrolling through his phone. "Said they were meant for just taking care of children and nothing else." The class erupted in murmurs. Thomas realized he had underestimated how strongly his students would react. "You're right to be critical," he managed. "What I'd like us to examine is how even deeply flawed thinkers influence literary movements. How can we reconcile valuable insights with troubling prejudices?" The discussion that followed was heated but productive, yet as students filtered out after class, Thomas noticed Maya lingering behind. "Professor Wells, are you okay? You seemed personally invested in defending Schopenhauer today." Her perception unsettled him. "Just trying to present a complete picture. See you Thursday, Maya." The faculty mixer at Dean Wilson's house should have been a welcome distraction, but Thomas found himself standing alone by the refreshment table, lost in thought. "You look like you could use something stronger than punch," came a voice. It was Dr. Sarah Chen from the philosophy department, offering him a glass of wine. "That obvious, huh?" Thomas accepted gratefully. "Word around campus is you've been on a Schopenhauer kick." Her smile was friendly but curious. "Brave choice for 2025. It started as research, but now I'm wondering if I've gone too far down the rabbit hole." Sarah leaned against the table. "You know what Nietzsche said about Schopenhauer? That he was the first admitted and inexorable atheist among us Germans, breaking from tradition, thinking dangerous thoughts." "But some thoughts are dangerous, for good reason," Thomas replied. "True, but understanding why someone arrived at flawed conclusions can be valuable." She swirled her wine thoughtfully. "Schopenhauer's mother was a successful novelist who apparently didn't give him much affection. Some biographers think his views on women stemmed from that relationship." "Personal pain turning into universal judgment," Thomas murmured, thinking of his own divorce. "Exactly." Sarah studied him closely. "Just remember that understanding someone's ideas doesn't mean you have to adopt them." The email arrived on Friday afternoon. Professor Wells, "I'm concerned about the direction of your recent lectures. Presenting Schopenhauer without adequately critiquing his misogynistic views sends a troubling message. Several female students have expressed discomfort. Please consider a more balanced approach." Maya Richards, Student Representative Literature, Department. Thomas stared at the screen, stomach knotting. Had he really been that one-sided? He thought back to the class discussion, trying to recall his exact words. He'd acknowledged Schopenhauer's problematic views, hadn't he? He began typing a reply, then deleted it. Started again, deleted again. Finally, he settled on asking Maya to meet during office hours on Monday. This wasn't a conversation for email. The weekend stretched before him, uncomfortably empty, save for the stack of Schopenhauer texts on his desk, which now seemed to judge him silently. Sunday morning found Thomas sitting on his balcony, watching the city wake up. Coffee grew cold beside him as he confronted uncomfortable truths. Was his fascination with Schopenhauer's dark views actually about his own unresolved bitterness? 3 years divorced, and he'd barely dated since. He'd told himself it was because he was busy, focused on his career, not interested in casual relationships. But was it really because somewhere deep down, he'd begun to believe relationships were inevitably disappointing? That women, no, that people, would always ultimately reveal themselves as self-interested? His phone chimed with a text from his sister. "Mom's 70th birthday dinner next weekend. Please say you're coming this time." He'd missed the last two family gatherings, always with plausible excuses. Work commitments, grading papers. The truth was more complicated. Seeing his sister happily married with children highlighted everything he'd failed to maintain in his own life. Thomas picked up his phone and typed, "Wouldn't miss it. Tell Mom I'll bring her favorite wine." It was time to step out of Schopenhauer's shadow. Monday afternoon, a knock on his office door. Maya Richards stood in the doorway, expression guarded but not hostile. "Thanks for coming." Thomas gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I've been thinking about your email all weekend." "And?" Maya sat down, setting her notebook on her lap. "You were right to call me out." Thomas found the admission came easier than expected. "I've been so focused on understanding Schopenhauer's philosophy that I haven't been critical enough of his more harmful views." Maya's posture relaxed slightly. I wasn't trying to get you in trouble, Professor. I just couldn't stay silent. I'm glad you didn't. Sometimes we need our students to teach us. He leaned forward. I'd like to dedicate our next class to specifically addressing the problematic aspects of Schopenhauer's views on women and how they've influenced literature in negative ways. That would be good, Maya nodded. But can I ask something personal? Thomas A. tensed but nodded. What drew you to Schopenhauer in the first place? Of all philosophers to focus on. The question hung in the air between them. Thomas considered deflecting, but decided on honesty. I think I was drawn to his pessimism during a difficult time in my own life, but that's not an excuse for not maintaining critical distance. Maya seemed to consider this. You know, my mom always says, understanding where our thoughts come from is the first step to deciding if they're worth keeping. Thomas smiled. Your mom sounds wise. You've been summoned, Rebecca said, appearing in his doorway later that afternoon. Dean Wilson wants to see you. Thomas felt his stomach drop. Did he say why? No, but I have a guess. She leaned against the doorframe. Maya Richards is his niece. Great, Thomas muttered. Want some advice? Rebecca's tone softened. Don't be defensive. Listen first. Thomas nodded gratefully. Thanks for the heads up. For what it's worth, she added, I think you're a good professor who got a little lost in a research rabbit hole. Happens to the best of us. As Thomas gathered his things, Rebecca added, By the way, a few of us are getting together Friday night. Drinks, food, absolutely no philosophy allowed. You should come. The invitation surprised him. I'd like that. Good. Because all work and no play makes Thomas a dull Schopenhauer devotee. He laughed for what felt like the first time in weeks. Dean. Wilson's office always reminded Thomas of an English gentleman's club. Leather-bound books, heavy wooden furniture, the faint smell of pipe tobacco though the man hadn't smoked in years. Thomas, have a seat. The dean's expression was unreadable. I understand there's been some concern about your recent focus on Schopenhauer. Yes, and I've already spoken with Maya about it. Thomas met the older man's gaze directly. I appreciate her bringing it to my attention, and I'm adjusting my approach. The dean's eyebrows rose slightly. I see. Well, that's good to hear. I got too focused on understanding Schopenhauer's worldview and didn't maintain enough critical distance in presenting it to students. Dean Wilson leaned back in his chair. You know, when I was about your age, I became fascinated with Nietzsche. My wife nearly left me, said living with a man who kept insisting nothing matters wasn't her idea of a good time. Thomas couldn't help but smile. The point is, Thomas, we all get drawn to ideas that speak to us during difficult times. The danger is in forgetting they're just ideas, not universal truths. I'm learning that, Thomas admitted. Good. The dean stood, signaling the end of the meeting. And Thomas, my niece thinks highly of you, despite recent events. Don't disappoint her. Thursday's class felt different. Thomas had reworked his entire lecture to focus specifically on how Schopenhauer's views on women had negatively influenced literary depictions throughout the 19th century. In Hardy's Tess of the D'Urbervilles, we see echoes of Schopenhauer's fatalistic view that women are driven primarily by reproductive instinct rather than intellectual curiosity, Thomas explained. But notice how Hardy simultaneously subverts this by giving Tess rich inner thoughts and moral agency that Schopenhauer would have denied her. The discussion was lively, with students eagerly pointing out examples from various texts where female characters either conform to or challenge Schopenhauerian stereotypes. What I hope we take from this, Thomas concluded, is that understanding philosophical influences doesn't mean endorsing them. It means recognizing how they shaped literature, for better or worse, and how literature sometimes pushed back against these limitations. After class, Maya gave him a small nod of approval as she left. It felt like a significant victory. Friday evening found Thomas at a crowded restaurant with Rebecca, Sarah, and several other colleagues he'd kept at arm's length for too long. So he tells the student, Kant can't help you with that. The table erupted in laughter at Sarah's philosophy joke. Even Thomas found himself genuinely laughing. I've missed this, he admitted during a lull in conversation. Missed what? Asked Rebecca, refilling his water glass. Being around people. Real people. Not just ideas on a page. Sarah raised her glass. To reconnecting with reality. As the evening progressed, Thomas found himself engaged in a conversation with Elaine about her recent trip to Germany. You should see Schopenhauer's Frankfurt, she said. The city adds context to his gloom. Beautiful but formal, ordered to the point of sterility in some areas. I'd like that, Thomas replied, surprised to realize he meant it not as a Schopenhauer pilgrimage, but as an actual vacation, something he hadn't taken in years. The summer program needs faculty chaperones, Elaine mentioned casually. Application. Deadline is next week. For the first time in months, Thomas felt a spark of genuine interest in something beyond his narrow research focus. His mother's birthday dinner was held at his sister Catherine's suburban home. The moment Thomas arrived, his 5-year-old niece Emma crashed into his legs. Uncle Thomas, you came. I promised, didn't I? He lifted her up, surprised at how much she'd grown since he'd last seen her. His mother's face when she saw him spoke volumes. Joy mingled with gentle reproach for his long absence. The prodigal son returns, she said, embracing him. During dinner, Thomas found himself actually present, listening to family stories, asking questions about his brother-in-laws. New job, helping Emma cut her food when she struggled. You seem different, Catherine said later as they washed dishes together. Less in your head. I had a wake-up call, Thomas admitted. Got too deep into some dark philosophy. Started seeing the world through a pessimist's eyes. Catherine handed him a plate to dry. Mom was worried about you. Said you sounded like Dad after the divorce. Their father's bitterness following the split from their mother had been legendary. A decade of complaints about women being impossible to understand and ultimately selfish. That's a comparison I needed to hear, Thomas said quietly. For what it's worth, Catherine added, I never thought you were like him. Just lost for a while. The following week, Thomas found himself back at the antique bookshop where his journey had begun. The elderly shopkeeper recognized him immediately. Ah, my Schopenhauer customer. Did you find what you were looking for in those pages? Thomas ran his fingers along the spines of old books. Not exactly, but I learned something about myself. The best books do that, the old man nodded. What can I help you with today? I'm looking for something different, something more hopeful, the shopkeeper suggested. Thomas smiled. Yes, exactly that. The old man disappeared into the stacks, returning with a worn volume. Try some Emerson. American Transcendentalism sees the divine in nature and humanity, quite the opposite of your German pessimist. As Thomas paid for the book, he asked, a question that had been nagging at him. Why did you point me toward Schopenhauer that day? You seemed to know it would affect me. The shopkeeper's eyes twinkled. You had the look of a man who needed to face his shadows before he could appreciate the light again. Was I wrong? Thomas considered this. No, you weren't wrong at all. The Frankfurt summer program application sat completed on Thomas's desk. 6 weeks leading students through German literary landscapes, from Goethe's birthplace to the black forest that inspired so many fairy tales. His cursor hovered over the submit button. Was he ready to step so fully back into the world, to be responsible not just for text but for young people navigating a foreign country? His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Did you apply yet? Deadline's today. Followed immediately by another from Sarah. If you don't submit that application, I'm assigning you Hegel reading as punishment. Complete works. Thomas smiled and clicked submit. Then he closed the Schopenhauer document he'd been working on for months and created a new file. The Shadow and the Light, Contrasting Philosophical Influences in 19th Century Literature. The knock on his open office door startled him. Maya stood there, a stack of books in her arms. Professor Wells? I was wondering if you might help me with my thesis proposal. I want to explore how female authors of the 19th century responded to philosophical misogyny through their characters. That sounds fascinating, Thomas said, genuinely interested. Come in. As Maya outlined her ideas, Thomas felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, the pure joy of academic exchange without the filter of his own biases and wounds. Schopenhauer had led him down a dark path, but the journey back had made him a better teacher, colleague, and person. Not because Schopenhauer was right, but because confronting darkness, both philosophical and personal, had finally shown him the way toward light.